And so we have Jeremy Berriault, who is bringing to us the don't put the Jaguar in an enclosure built for a polar bear. Hey, Jeremy, how you
Hello,
doing?
I'm
Uh,
good.
Polar bears? I mean, are we talking about some kind of enclosure that's for cold things and a Jaguar won't actually fit in there, or it's too big, too small, too cold, too hot? What does this all mean?
Yeah, so what this is about, it's based off a book I just published a couple months ago.
Uh-huh.
And then it's called you'll see the links towards the end. It's called Beyond the Frameworks: Building Agile Growing Agility. Sorry, a little nervous, so I completely messed up the last part of my book. I got it on the slide title, so we're good with that. And as part of the kind of marketing for it, I created a blog about it where I put this title, like you don't put the Jaguar in a polar bear enclosure. And it's really just about setting up the environment. And so what we're going to be going through today, and you'll see some slides about this as I share. I think now is a good time to do that.
Yeah, go for it. The floor is yours,
The
Jeremy.
floor is mine. Awesome. All right. Now, if it starts sharing, there we go. Everyone should be able to see my screen now, right? Got some thumbs. Awesome. So, really, what this started out as 2 years of writing this book, and it was just a lot of things that I gathered over the years and wanted to kind of start sharing with everyone that I could. So, a little bit more about me. So, I'm Jeremy Berriault. You can mess up my last name as much as you want. Over 50 years, people have been messing it up, and I'm used to it. So I've had my first name messed up a few times also, which is kind of weird because Jeremy is not that odd of a name, but it is, I guess, for some people. So yeah, the purpose of the book was really exploring like agile principles and how to create that adaptable environment. It's understanding kind of the learnings, right? And so this presentation, what we're going to go through is kind of some of the learnings that go through as you read the book. I created what's called the Evolutionary Agilist program. It's a coaching program to help kind of agilists to kind of improve, not just focus just on the framework, but kind of get on the behaviors and help understand that in the background. And really, I'm about kind of tailoring those agile environments. And you'll see that as we go through this presentation, how it kind of all ties in. So the book itself is broken up into three parts. So there's the first part where we talk about a foundation. Second part, we talk about system. And the last part we call evolve. Initially, when I wrote this book, there were actually just 9 sections, so 9 chapters throughout. And then my poor editor was screaming and yelling at me when I told her, it's like, oh, do you know what? I think we got to add another chapter at the end just to make a little more sense. So that's why on the evolve piece, there's 4 pieces. The new piece I added was the change management. But really, the focus on this, and as we go through this, you'll see how there's the foundation, then you get the system when you start getting the engine running. And then once you get the engine running and you're at like that right altitude, the team is humming along, then you start evolving as you go through. And you'll see how it all ties in, especially from a building that enclosure. I'll be talking a lot about zoos and I'll be talking a lot about agile environments. So it should be fun. The way we'll do it is I know like some people ask questions at the end. At the end of each kind of main section, so once we finish the foundation section, we'll take some time. Any questions that you have, I'll answer them. Same thing with system and same thing with evolve. So part of the reason when this all came about, like I said, when I wrote this blog, I was watching. My son's in college right now, and he was watching a documentary he had to do for his class, and I was in the living room, and I didn't feel like moving anywhere, so I watched it too. And it was talking about environments and the animals and how they adapt and go through. And it was interesting as I watched that, and then I was kind of finishing up my book around the same time. was that, oh, this kind of makes a little bit of sense, like regarding animals and the environments. And really, when we talk about, when I come up with jaguars and the polar bear enclosure, it's like, as we've all gone to zoos before, we've seen animals in different environments and different like TV shows or anything like that. Is jaguars were in a jungle setting, so you want to create the environment that's a jungle setting for them to thrive, and not kind of like a rocky, whole lot of water, feeding them fish all the time. It's not going to be conducive, and it's actually going to create more stress for that jaguar. Because as we know, when we look at agile environments, you don't have to read the slide. This is just more from an information purpose, so you can see it. Is when we go in an agile environment, we know there's a lot of things that have to get set up for a good agile environment to thrive, for everyone on the teams to thrive. And not only just the teams, but also for the executives, for the leadership, how they kind of tie everything in so that they can see how it all works out, right? And how you self-managed teams, self-organizing teams, getting the value, getting the understanding the goals, achieving those goals. So here, when we talk about the enclosure, is we always have to start somewhere, right? We have to understand where the starting line is. So from a zoo perspective, their starting line is, well, we have a jaguar coming in. Where are they from? Like, we have to understand where they came from before we can get them in the zoo for them to kind of live and survive and enjoy and thrive in that environment. Similar to an agile environment for an organization, we have to know where we start. And I found for myself, I don't know about you, I've seen a lot of teams when they've gone through a transformation, they kind of forget where they started, how it all was before they did the change or the transformation. And normally what would happen is, if one thing would go wrong, then all of a sudden everyone's like, well, agile doesn't work. They throw their hands in the air. It's like, well, agile doesn't work because now we're just having all these problems. But they don't think back onto, well, what would have happened if we did this the old way? And a team I worked with a couple of years ago, I did exactly that. They were struggling. They were having a hard time trying to figure something out, and they were having all these changes. And I just brought up the question. It's like, okay, if this was done 6 months ago before you guys did the transformation, what would happen? You got this change coming in. What would happen? Well, we would have to have this meeting. We have to do this. They listed off a whole bunch of things. I said, okay, how long do you think it would take to do all that and to get all these approvals? They're like, well, it would take probably a few months. And the problem that we resolved it within a week. So I just kind of reminded us, like, okay, well, something that you said before would take months, we just finished it in a week. I think this stuff is working. We just got to keep the behaviors going. And one of the things is, when they don't understand maybe sometimes like the vision, like the agile kind of guidelines and how to get those behaviors. And they don't have that vision to go forward. Some of the vision is just like, okay, let's get stuff done faster. Okay. Can't really identify faster, but sure, we'll identify faster. And we go through all this and building this foundation and understanding, like, okay, what's the culture like? Like, how do we align everything to the culture? That team I talked about, when they went through they did their transformation before I came in. They had the transformation, they had some problems, they brought me in to help fix it. And one of the things I found was they just did like a 2-3 day course, like, here's Scrum. And then after, I was like, okay, you're a Scrum team, go. And they, from a culture perspective, they didn't kind of work on their behaviors to help on that, to evolve and get better and move into like an agile, iterative type fashion. And part of that was the stakeholders. They believe the stakeholders were just the team, not the leadership. The leadership just says, yep, agile's good, thumbs up. Okay, I'll walk away and you guys do what you need to do. They didn't engage everyone around. And once I went in and started engaging everyone, then things started to flow. Things started to get better. They started to evolve and get better. Like, so when I went in, they were doing it. I shudder every time I say this, but they did 4-week sprints. They tried to do 2-week sprints. Apparently that failed miserably. And when they did 4-week sprints, they would do maybe, I think, 5 tickets in 4 weeks. And these were tickets like they estimated they did a story points of like 5 or 8 or like some of them were 3, and they just had a hard time getting into it. After we started getting everyone understanding their objectives and kind of getting personally involved and having their values and having their understanding their starting point, within 2 months, their story point velocity jumped like about 150%. Their throughput jumped like almost 300%. So they were getting more tickets. They started to see the benefits. And part of it was they started understanding where they came from. And when they understand that, then it's about understanding their goals. And when we look at from a zoo perspective, their goal is to make sure that the Jaguar is not stressed, is is ensure that they're properly fed, they have enough exercise, they have all that they need to survive, even though it is an enclosure. It's not like a jungle where they can go wherever they want, but we want them to be as comfortable as they can and is not as stressed to go through. Right. So there's your unique organization goal. So each animal would have a unique goal. It's not one of those like, okay, we just want the animal to survive. That's kind of not a very good goal. It's much the same as we want everything done faster. Okay. That's nice. Good job. Come up with something better. And we use that. We use these. We all know the SMART. We know we want to make sure it's outcome driven, and we want to make sure it's tailored for the team. So these goals, one of the teams I worked with, we created agile values for the team. So this was going to be part of their team charter. They were going to build it out. It was going to give them the ideas of how they're going to work together and their values on what they believe in and how it linked into the organization. We didn't take like the values from the manifesto page and did a copy and paste. I worked with them and we created actual agile values for that team and how they believed and how it all tied in. We used it as kind of a base, but we created something specific just for them. I think a good example, and I bring this up in my book, is if you look at Google. If you go to Google's values, if you read the values and you think with like an agile environment type hat and behaviors, those would be considered agile values, because one of the values is they talk about we want to make sure we give the information to the customer. Well, it's the same as the principles. It's like, okay, customer interaction. So we want to make sure we keep these goals in sync and things going as we go through. And the last part of the foundation, when I talk about design, I don't talk about the design of the product. I don't talk about the design of any sort of features. I'm talking about the organization and the team design. And here it's about making sure it fits in with the culture. You want to make sure it's a good fit. You want to ensure that the things are being done iteratively, whether they're doing Scrum, Band, Kanban, Safe, Less. I'm not going to go through the other probably 25 other frameworks out there, but there is a lot of out there, but they're all based on being iterative. So you want to make sure that you design the team, design the environment so that it's iterative. When you look at a zoo enclosure, this is where you start building out. You put like big long branches in the trees, you put green foliage everywhere. You make sure there's like a nice little river or something, like a little pool for the Jaguar to play in. All that stuff is there so that it simulates the jungle as best for that Jaguar to survive in and to enjoy and to have to live in. Right. And you want to make sure that it fits the overall values. So when I talked about the values in the last one, this is where kind of everything kind of ties everything in. And now, after you've gone through this design, now you have your foundation. Now you have kind of like your base to get things moving and have the teams sort of like get moving on going through Scrum or using Scrum or Safe or even a mix of some. Right now, currently, I'm working with actually a martial arts school and having them turn themselves into an agile environment. And we're using kind of like a mix of Kanban, a little bit of Scrum here and there. I'm taking bits and pieces that fits what they need to do. And I don't just work with martial arts clubs. I've worked with banks, insurance companies, marketing firms, and every time I work with them, I always make sure I tweak it so it's best fits for them and for their culture. So right now, that is it from a foundations perspective. Do we have any questions?
No, so far, no questions.
So far, no questions. I know if I'm talking too fast, please let me know. Sometimes I do, like I get a little excited. It's like the kid and the like, yeah. So if I am talking too fast, please let me know and I will slow down. I try to slow down as best I can, but I'm a very high energy guy, as you've seen, and I like kind of pushing things along. All right. So the next thing is now when we get into the system. So when we look at the system is really now you got the engine built, you got your foundation built, and you start moving along. Right now you start adapting to your plan. You start moving through. Here we have like your customized transformation plan. I think one of the parts I put in my book is that there is no one playbook for an agile transformation. There isn't. Some people would like to think there's a one playbook there. They can come out and say, hey, this is how we're going to do it. It's not. That's where you kind of start running into some problems. But when we look at from the enclosure, now it's maybe the Jaguar's a runt. Maybe the Jaguar's small. Maybe it's just a male. Maybe we want to get a female in there to help procreate, have little Jaguars all over the place. Maybe they are certain setup. Maybe they like certain setups. Maybe they're coming from a different zoo and they want to create that customized kind of enclosure for them. And that's where you get that defined roadmap, where you identify the goals and your outcomes of what you want to achieve by that point, right? You want to make sure it's best for here from an organization perspective, what's best for the organization, what's best for the teams and the product and the clients and this, like everyone around that's using the product or service. And no different than at the zoo enclosure. You don't want to create a zoo enclosure, but then have a big fence on the walkway so no one could like that's completely blocking the way, right? You want maybe some glass. You want people to be able to see the Jaguars as they're kind of walking around during the day. And here you want those kind of identify those milestones that go through. It's like, we're going to do this by this. We're going to do this by this. We want to get here. We want to get here. And we know we don't want to have like, we do have to have dates. All projects have to have some dates, but you want to at least identify some goals so that this is what we're going to try to achieve by this point. This is what we want to do. And the last part, which really kind of what I really work with all my teams, is celebrating achievements. Now, a lot of people, a lot of teams and organizations that I worked with and worked for, they felt that, hey, we're not going to have a celebration until everything's all said and done. Once everything's in production, once people start using the service, then we'll pat ourselves in the back. And there, I thought like it's a complete missed opportunity because you're running through and you're kind of you might be burning yourself out. And if you just keep churn, by the time you get to the end product, by the time you get everything done or you get like your MVP and you send that out into the world, then it gets to a point where it's like, okay, I'm done. Like they're just completely exhausted and they can't maybe help impacts their motivation. And for me, like I love to motivate. I love to keep people like engaged. I want to keep people going. For me personally, I teach jujitsu as well. And every class I teach, I try to make sure I'm like high energy and kind of keep people moving. And there's some stuff I teach that is boring. It's very boring, but I try to help them understand that how it impacts and how it grows further. And doing this really keeps people motivated as you go through. And it's no different than if you have kids that play sports or a team sport or anything like that, and the coach is telling them good job, and the team is kind of giving them a good hand, patting them on the back. It's that type of feeling, and it's like, okay, cool. Now we got that. Now let's go on to the next. Let's go on to the next. And if something bad happens, like you can still sort of celebrate that achievement. Like something bad happens, you learn from it. Okay, now let's make things better. And then it's like, then the good celebration comes afterwards. Like, hey, cool. We learned from when you do a particular keystroke, you can wipe out 3/4 of a test case database. which I did about 25 years ago on a mainframe. And I worked on it. We got it back up, but it was like trying to figure out how to get it back up and how to get all the old data back without like redoing like 6 months worth of work. That was the fun part. And when we get through, now we start looking at the culture. Like we've talked about the culture in the first part, where we understand, okay, from an enclosure, the Jaguar is from a jungle. Okay, what do we have in a jungle? Now we're trying to get that jungle in the enclosure. And now we're making things work from an organization perspective, from a team perspective. It's creating that culture with the agile values that we talked about in that foundation part. Right? It's making sure that they're following those agile values, and we nurture it. We want to make sure things grow. We want the leaders to know that they have to keep involved. They have to understand that these agile values are not just for the teams or individuals on the teams. This is for them to follow as well. This is where they get to come in. They start becoming more agile. One of the things I talk about in the book is I say, show your work. And I've done this. I'm a former CTO or acting CTO for a company. And I created my own little Kanban board of all the stuff I was going to do. Obviously, there's some stuff I can't say, like there's secret stuff that executives can't say to everyone, but I at least show off all the work I was doing that week so they would understand. So I'm exhibiting my agile values. Okay, I'm using Kanban. You guys are all Scrum. I'm using Kanban because this is what best works for me. And all that is part of that behavior change, right? It's how we start to understand and start creating those agile values. And when this is the difference, I've seen some books, Jeff Dalton's Great Big Agile, he talks about it, where you're being agile, not just doing agile. And this is where you focus on the behaviors of being agile. You want to create those behaviors to go through. And that then creates that adaptive environment. And I've seen it where if you don't have the values and the leaders don't exhibit those values, then the teams will only be able to go so far. And then it just starts falling apart. There's too much stress. It doesn't work all that well. And then again, people start throwing their hands in the air saying, well, agile doesn't work because it's like we're having all these problems. And again, if they don't understand the start part, then it just grows from there. And it's the understanding all that and tying it all together. That's how you create your culture. And that's how you create your understanding of how things start slowly falling into place. And that helps understand those agile values, and everything's aligned. It's aligned to the organization, and it just kind of builds up. I'm sure we've all done the year-end reviews. Well, if you're a contractor, I don't think you've done year-end reviews. But if you work for a company, you do your year-end reviews, and they say, well, okay, what are your goals? They have to somehow tie into the enterprise goals or the department goals, which then ties into the enterprise goals and all leads up. Agile values is no different. Your agile values should actually go lead up to the organization values and what they value the most. Again, Google, if you look at it, they talk a lot about the customer, keeping the data and moving through. I'm sure all those team values are kind of lead up into that or say something similar to that to get them going. And I'm sure it's a little bit surprising when I say bring trust towards the last part of the system, because we all want to build trust. Here, I talk about in building trust, like you're building trust as you go, because as you build the foundation, as you go through understanding the start, getting the design, understanding the goals, everyone is involved in that. It's not just a team kind of developing it on their own in a silo. It's everyone involved within the actual transformation that's building out all these goals, which then builds out the trust. When we get to this point, now you've got the system going, you've got your foundation, you've got your motor, you got your system moving, you know how the teams are going to start working. And now it's how we start looking at how we're going to empower the teams. How are we going to make decisions, promote that decision making, and make sure it's transparent? How are we going to build the trust and let the teams do what they need to do? I'm sure everyone's kind of felt this or understood this, seen this before, where teams can't really make a decision. They come up with something and they go to the senior leaders or they go to the manager and say, okay, we need help. You tell us what to do. The team I worked with a couple of years ago had something very, very similar. They were getting into a problem, and then all of a sudden they just said, well, we can't do anything because we need 3 VPs approval. And my question was like, I had to shake my head, and I'm like, okay, what do you mean you have to get the VP's approval? I think it was to make a couple small changes in the application to meet this particular type of goal. And they're like, well, we need to get their approval because that's the way it's all set up. It's like, well, but the original outcome is this, right? Yes. Are we still hitting that outcome? Yes. So why do we need a VP's approval if we're still going to hit that outcome? And it's like, well, because they need to know what the design is. I'm like, really? I don't think the VP particularly cares about the design. I think they care more about the actual outcome. Because as long as we follow all the guidelines they give us, that's what they should do. Now, unfortunately, I was overruled. They did go to the VP, and I think the VPs kind of asked the same questions, like, well, are we still getting the same thing? They said yes. Like, okay, then go ahead and do it. So the next time when we had a next chat, when we did our retrospective, I brought this up. It's like, hey, do we need to really go to the VP for certain things as long as we're getting the same outcome? And they all kind of said no. It's like, okay, well then I think we can ask the VP, do you mind if we just do this on our own? Like, be nice about it, kind of be transparent. And that will build that trust along, and they can go through. Right. And that kind of helps empower that team. I put here empower team ownership. I should have changed it when I wrote this. I prefer to say team stewardship instead of team ownership, or empowering ownership. And the reason why is I read a psychological study a little while ago when I was talking about the terms ownership and stewardship. And it was saying that from a ownership perspective, people feel, yes, they kind of feel empowered that they own this, but then what happens if they leave the team, or if someone leaves the team, or if something happens and there's some changes to make and new people come in, and now you're giving ownership of something else, of something that somebody else created, to someone else. And the way the study went was that the stress involved in that was high for a lot of people, because it was just hard for them to kind of understand, like, okay, do I make a change or do I not make a change? Like, how is this going to work? And it was talking about stewardship, where stewardship is more almost like a step below ownership, and more that you sort of own it. I'll put it in quotes here. You own the application, but you're more stewards in that you're building for the future. You're setting things up to grow in the future. And there's Simon Sinek's book. I think it's Leaders Eat Last. Oh no, The Infinite Game. Sorry, I've read them both. The Infinite Game, where he talks about how leaders should focus on just kind of building things out so that when they leave, someone just steps in and they just continue growing and growing and growing, instead of having a leader leave and then a new leader come in and just for the sake of change, make change for the sake of change. So when I talk about team ownership, I change it to stewardship. That's kind of the reason why. And then when we look at, obviously, we want to talk about open collaboration, be consistent. And I think that's probably the big thing here, is being consistent. This morning, I just put in a LinkedIn post after my workout about being disciplined in what we do, whether it's working out or in agile environment and Scrum. We want to be disciplined in our behaviors, because discipline, as per Jocko Willink, if you don't know who that is, he's the person that wrote Extreme Ownership. He wrote that discipline leads to freedom. So, and what he meant by that was, in the military, when they are given their guidelines and they stick within their guidelines and they're disciplined within their guidelines, and as long as they fall within it, they can achieve, and they know what the goal is, they can do what they need to achieve that goal. No different than an agile team. We understand what our goals are. We understand what we need to do. We want to get the outcome that we want. We want that achieve those goals so that for client satisfaction, even for a team, better team satisfaction. So as long as we fit within those guidelines, then we're free to do what we want. And the one team I talked about this, and they were kind of taken aback when I said, do whatever you want. Here are your guidelines. I don't care what you do. As long as you guys don't fall outside of these guidelines, then you're good to go. Because they were a banking team. They're like, well, what if we hit the audit? It's like, well, what part of the audit do you need to have? Well, we need to see this, this, and this. It's like, okay, does it matter how you get those three things? No, we just need to show these three things. It's like, okay, well, do what you need to do, but you still have to hit these three things. We still have, those are the guidelines. We can't get past that. But let's work around and adapt so that we can be more efficient and effective in how we get there. So for the system piece, this is now the engine, right? This is now, you've built the enclosure, you have the jungle, you have the branches, you have the diet all set up. You're about to kind of open the cage door and let the Jaguar in to see how he or she likes it and how they're able to thrive. Same thing from an agile environment, from an agile team, is now you've built the foundation. Now you've built the system. And here's where you start kind of involving the frameworks and what best fits them. And you giving them the trust to say, okay, here are your goals, here are your guidelines. Go ahead, succeed. We trust you. We know what you guys know what to do. So now that we've gone through kind of the foundation and the system piece, are there any questions? Has anyone come up with anything?
I think the main thing I see here is Katiana's wondering about the book that you mentioned when you said teams were learning to be agile rather than do agile.
It was it's by Jeff Dalton. It's called Great Big Agile.
Great Big Agile.
I think it was published in, I want to say 2019, 2018.
Okay. And then Diana appreciated the distinction between ownership and stewardship. That really resonated. So thank you for that.
Yeah, it was, like that was something I kind of, I started changing the way I thought about that probably in the past year and a half. I think it was as I was writing the book, it started to really kind of make more and more sense. And again, my poor editor, she was not happy when I started changing ownership to stewardship and changing the wording of stuff that we already finished. So my fault. I'll take ownership for that. That's not stewardship. It's my book. All right. So the last piece. So when I initially started writing this book and started coming out with the outline, I started talking about maturity. This course itself, this book itself was based off of a COVID course project I did because I needed something to do. So I created like a 9-piece. That's why there was supposed to be 9 chapters, but now there's 10. We'll get into that later. But I started talking about agile maturity. And as I was working through this, I started kind of thinking about it and thinking about like the term maturity as a whole. And if you look at CMMI, CMM, any sort of maturity model, it has like a last step, right? Okay, if you do this, and this, then you're considered mature. And if we look at the manifesto and how it's written and how a lot of other blogs and like all that's gone on, it doesn't really talk about maturity. It's almost, you're talking about evolution. You're evolving. The teams are getting better. You're continuously improving, right? What happens when you continuously improve? You evolve, you change. Last year, I don't know if anyone was at Agile 23 in Florida. I got to speak there that year, and I talked about agile evolution and agile maturity. If you're at my presentation, I will apologize profusely because I think everything that could have gone wrong in that presentation did. It wasn't probably my best speaking engagement I've ever done, but I did get some good feedback on it. And I got some positive feedback along with some negative. But yeah, so this is where this evolution, this evolve piece came out, was more, okay, I want to talk about us continuous improvement. Like we all know how Scrum works. We all know how less works. We know how it's safe, like all those frameworks. We have kind of the guidelines and the steps. Like, yeah, we can sort of tweak them a little bit, but their steps are there. We don't want to be like, we're a mature Scrum shop. To me, it doesn't really resonate. I want people to say it's like, we're a kick-ass agile shop. We evolve, we continuously improve left, right, and center. So that's where this chapter really came out of. I want us to evolve. I want us to get better at what we do on a daily basis. And the first part of the evolve was about quality. And it's not just quality assurance or quality control, as they'd like to get mixed together. This is just quality overall. So you want to make sure, we always want to prioritize quality first. We don't want bad things to go out, obviously. We want to make sure we have that strong feedback mechanism. I think over the weekend, I saw someone put up a meme and it said Agile in 2002. And it had this guy with a big brain saying, it's like, oh, we're going to have customer feedback. This is going to be great. We're going to involve everyone. And it shows underneath, beside it says Agile 2024. And it was like kind of like the troll guy trying to put like a square peg in a round hole, saying, we're just going to get it done. So we want to make sure we have that strong feedback mechanism, not just with our stakeholders, with our customers, with our clients, but also within each other, right? The team I worked with when I came in after the transformation, they were still siloed. They were still business analysts, product owners, and one team. There was the QA on one team, developers on another team. And the way they worked with each other and they collaborated, well, the lack of collaboration between them and feedback between them was very noticeable. And that's why they were only able to get 5 tickets across and done in a 4-week sprint. Once we started kind of getting to talk more and having feedback and having them talk with each other more and have them understand that, hey, the test person could actually probably provide better feedback on how to write a better story. And the developer can start helping the tester writing their automation scripts and kind of get them working in like that. And once they started doing that, as I said, like there's velocity jumped like 150% within like months. Their throughput went through the roof. Like it went almost like 200-300% within a couple months. So they were able to get more tickets across, and they're seeing better quality as they were doing it. The team, they were doing, they had one story. This was funny. They wrote it as they said it was like a 3-point story, but it took them like 3 weeks to try to get done. And when I started investigating, I started asking the questions, I found out was that the QA team was testing every different variable possible under that particular story. So it was about a name on an account. And they were testing the name on each and every joint account, combination of joint accounts, and they had like 8 different types of accounts. So it turned out to be like 300 and some odd test cases that they created for like just one ticket that said, I want to change the name from this to this. As we talked through, is like the variables don't work. The code's not coded that way, is it? And the developer's like, no, it's coded like this. It goes by a table and it does this. Okay, so whatever on the table, if it's on the table, it's going to do it. Yes. Okay. And then we went to the testers, like, do you really need to test whether it checks something on the table? You just want to check something. If there's something on the table and it picks it, yes. If it's outside of the table and it can't pick it, there's your 2 main test cases. Everything else is kind of falls by as waste. And that's how we developed those clear standards, right? That's how we understood that, okay, this is how we should look at as a team working together. So this goes back to the agile values, the team charter, how they're going to work together. right? And how they're going to continuously improve. That team now, actually, it got dissolved. I found out the team kind of, they shifted everyone off, as what most banks do, is like, oh, the team doesn't have to do anything to do, we'll just make them do something else. But when I left, like I said, their velocity before, when I started with them, it was about 5 tickets. I'm trying to remember. I think it was like maybe 15, 20 story points. When I left them, it was like 250 story points. Their throughput, again, was about 5 tickets. They were pumping out like close to 35 tickets for every 4-week sprint. So this shows that improvement that team did, like how they evolved and got better, right? And then we always did constant training. For any of us that have done, like, our agile coaches or scrum masters, we know we love workshops, right? We love doing workshops, helping people train, help people learn. And this is what we need to do. In the book, way I kind of brought it up was more, there has to be like a training program within the organization or department. Create a training backlog. This idea of a training backlog goes back to that Great Big Agile. And Jeff Dalton, he brought it up saying, hey, like, why don't you have a training backlog so you can understand your training needs? And not only that, the leaders and leadership would understand what the training needs are, and they can work together. It's not about sending people to courses. It's about making sure they can learn somehow. So YouTube has a boatload of courses on there for us. Like, maybe it takes 5-10 minutes. Maybe you have to watch a bit more. It's there. It's free. You can start learning. You can try to learn from that. There's books. For me, what I try to do is I try to read at least 1 book a month. Or if I'm listening to audiobooks, I try to listen to 2 books a month if it's audiobooks. So for me, I'm continuously learning, and I think everyone else is continuously learning. And that's what helps get us better, right? Like, we want to be 1% better tomorrow than we were today. That's what we want to try to achieve. And if you look from a mathematical perspective, if you look at it that way, if you're 1% better over 365 days, I'm trying to remember, I think the number is you'll be like over, I think 300% better than you were a year before. Like, I was really bad at math, and I can't do 1 to 360. So 365, but it just shows that we can continuously improve and get better at what we do. And here, if we go back to the enclosure, we're looking at how is the Jaguar adapting? How are they, like, are they climbing the trees? Are they enjoying the trees? Do they want more shade? Does it look like they need more shade? How is the sun coming around in the park? How are people enjoying looking at the Jaguars and coming across? So that's how they continuously evolve and get better at what they're doing to make that enclosure. And here we get from an evolution perspective, right? So yeah, this is like my one of my colleagues kind of said, you have evolve under evolve. I'm like, oh yeah, I know, it's kind of funny, but it's just the way it worked out, right? It's more keeping that continuous improvement going. Right? It's enjoying, adapting. Everything that comes up, we have to adapt, not fall back to what we did. Again, we know where we started, so we don't want to go back there. It's about continuously going forward. So what's going on now that's driving us, that's making us being more innovative? And I talk about innovation where a lot of people think about innovation as like, oh, the next big thing on our cell phones. Oh, the next big thing in tech, the next big thing in this. Innovation doesn't have to be just that. Innovation can be how the team works together to get something done. It could be just taking one small kind of process or flow and making a small tweak to make it even better. Right? That's how we continuously innovate. And I think that's how we got to think about innovation, is just, okay, it doesn't have to be the oh wow moment. We always want to try to achieve that oh wow moment, but we also want to achieve that oh wow moment and like, wow, this was better. Like, we got through this a lot faster than we did because we changed, we promoted ourselves to make sure we got better at what we did. Right. And we want to be very open to change. I worked with a couple teams last year, actually beginning of this year. And there were some people that were very hesitant on changing, on becoming an agile shop. They like the whole traditional waterfall type way of doing things. And I had to work with them to understand what were their thinking about. And most of it is those cognitive bias, right? There's I got a poster in my office that has 24 different cognitive bias. And for them, they were just anchored on, well, I've seen teams that have gone through an agile transformation. They had nothing but problems and they were angry and they were upset. I don't want to get angry and upset, so I just don't want to do it. And it was working with them to try to, now that I knew that, it was changing their kind of view. It's like, okay, let's work through. And I got them involved, made them stakeholders. Like, okay, what can we do to make your life better? And part of it was, I also asked the questions like going, okay, walk me through what you do. And they're walking me through some of the stuff they did. And I started seeing, and I hear in their voices how anxious they would get in doing what they were doing. And when I picked up on that anxiety, it's like, okay, well, what if we did something that made this a little easier for you? What if we did this that made that a little easier for you? And we picked things off and moved it in. And they started kind of seeing the benefits. And again, this was one of those that I didn't change into Scrum. The VP that brought me in made it very clear, I don't want to be a Scrum shop. And I'm like, all right, well, we'll just make sure it works just for you guys. And we made it work for them. And part of it was making sure that they gave us feedback. They gave me feedback. And this was the part here, the change management piece. This is where I started adding stuff in. The next two pieces was actually, it turned into a very large chapter. And I decided it'd be best if we split it up. So this is the first part where we talked about change management. And the last organization I worked with, they didn't have a change management policy. They didn't have any rules whatsoever. So it was interesting in me trying to do a change and they had no change management system. So I had to kind of help draw one up for them. So I had to work with HR and we did that. But we wanted to make sure we understand each of these points, right? We want to make sure we have a right strategy. We want to make sure we overcome resistance. And for me, I always got overcome resistance because I tie them to either a cognitive bias or a logical fallacy. And that's where I find usually they kind of fall into. Like I just talked about anchoring. Right? Anchoring is where basically you're stuck on that idea. It's nothing's going to change your mind. So it's trying to get past all that so they can see how they can get better at what they do and what the benefits are of that change. I'm just keeping track of my time here. I think we're still good. And when I left that organization after the change with the teams, I gave the leadership, okay, this is what you guys have to do to keep support. I always check in on them, make sure everything's going well. So far, so good. Knocking on wood, everything's going well because the leaders are supporting those teams. They are kind of pushing them along, making sure that the teams they're not being kind of micromanaged. They don't feel micromanaged and they're able to get the work done. And they had this, the last time I talked to them, they had this one major release that they wanted to get done. And they were having problems. Even when I was there, they were having problems getting through. And after I left, it was almost like a light switch went off and things started to churn. Like that system part started to really get involved. It really started working. They were able to make that major outcome on time and without any issue. And this was probably like their first release in 3 years where they actually got the release done, everything they wanted to get done on time when they wanted to. Previously, all other releases, either they took out, they descoped, or they delayed. So this was it was good for them. It was a good achievement for them. And they really got through and they understood where everything was coming from. And the last part was from a growing, right? So now you're evolving, now you're growing out into everyone else. And from here, I started using the DISC kind of framework. Has anyone heard of DISC? Yeah. So I started using DISC with any of my transformations, even my coaching now, I use DISC. And if you don't know what DISC is, it's kind of the four main behaviors. It's from a study that was done, I think it was back in 1920 something, way back when. If you do a search on the internet, there's something called Everything DISC. We'll get into that in a second. And it breaks it down into four behaviors. There's dominant, influence, sustain, and I believe, I keep getting stuck between consistent. I think it's consistent. I'll have to take a look at my book again. But each of those, they all have different behaviors. So for me, for instance, under the DISC model, I am very high on the D scale. So I'm dominant. I'm very kind of blunt. And it's interesting, when I got my assessment and I started reading it, and I was with my wife, and she goes, there's some parts I'm like, I don't do that. And she goes, no, you do. She always kind of keeps me centered. But it was interesting because a lot of the stuff that I talked about of what I do it, but I also understand part of my behaviors, and I want to make sure I adjust to everyone else and all the different types of styles, because I don't want to seem like, so under the D style, someone that's under the sustainable style, I'm very I'm mean. They might think of me as mean because I'm very like straight, like don't sugarcoat anything. Just tell me what you want, tell me what I need, and I'll go away and do it. So I use this with all the teams that I work with, because now they understand how each other works, and it actually helps help with collaboration as well. So as I said, this isn't just a theory. This book wasn't really a theory. It's stuff that I've built up over time. And the company that I just talked about this past year, they were trying to complete like a whole lot of work, and they were just having a hard time doing it. And they initially thought that it was going to take them 2 years to get it all done. They were able to get it in they were able to get like close to all of it done within like 6-7 months. Right. So here it says 80% done in 8 months. And that 80%, the other 20% was all like kind of like the low hanging fruit. Like there was stuff that there's not a lot of value, but they were able to provide a good chunk of the value to their clients within the timeline they told them they were going to get to, which was good because a lot of those clients already kind of paid for the service. And the fact that they got the service when they said they were going to get it, compared to other times, it made them a lot happier. And
hey, Jeremy, just sorry to interrupt, just quickly. We are actually at time, and so I didn't know if you wanted to just maybe wrap it up in the next 5 minutes or so here, and but this is so interesting. I wish we could just keep going and going. So.
Yep, no problem. So this was just okay, yeah, because I'm on my next. Okay, well, I talk about the challenges, overcoming the challenges. We all know what them are, like from a leadership, inconsistent practices, cultural resistance, lack of understanding. But really, it's when you understand everyone's kind of behaviors and how you build out that foundation, this stuff kind of goes away. You don't really see it happen. And it goes beyond all this, right? You want to find these quick wins. We want to enable a smooth transition. And we want to understand those motivations. So for me, I always look at the motivations of the individuals and push through. So there's a QA. So I'll just, before we take any questions, like this is the last slide. So the book is called Beyond the Framework. You can get it on Amazon. I am working right now to get it actually in bookstores as well. You can get it on Google, I think Google Books too. My evolutionary agilist programs. If you go to my website, I talk about them a little bit. I have a couple blurbs about them. If you'd like to learn more about that, feel free to contact me. Same thing with Everything DISC and 5 behavior assessments. I provide those as well. Like I said, I work with teams on those. And if you'd like to learn more about that, feel free to get a hold of me. And that was like the fastest ending I've ever done to a presentation.
Sorry about that, Jeremy.
That's okay. I was looking at the time too. I'm like, oh, I'm running close. Okay, let's just quickly go through this.
Well, you know what? It's just a reason to come back, right? We'll have part 2.
Yep.
So Yeah, that would be awesome. We would welcome you back anytime. And thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your time and your knowledge and with this group. And yeah, we just so appreciate it. And everyone who came today, appreciate you coming today as well. So I hope everyone this is a great start to a week. So I hope everyone has a great week, and we'll see you next time at Scrum Masters of the Universe. So thanks again, Jeremy. Appreciate it.
No problem. If anyone does have any questions, you can get a hold of me on LinkedIn, and you can reach me through there.
Also, will you be sharing the slide deck that we can send when we send out the video link?
Yep. Just let me know where to send it to, and or I could I'll send it to you. I got your contact information. I could send it to you.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.